I have a woefully undersubscribed subreddit, so please do me a favour. If you're a Redditor, head on over to r/Postmortem Studios and talk about anything related to any of my shenanigans. Peace. Hello lovelies, apologies for my dishevelled appearance, but it is really hot. Hot enough to talk about a game set in North Africa. So today we're going to be talking about one of my own releases, Postcards from Avalidad, which is written by Miguel Ribeiro, who has been keeping me very, very busy lately by giving me a bunch of scripts to edit and lay out and put out. Miguel is a master of what I've been calling an adventure context. It's not an adventure per se, it's not a setting book per se, it's not a game exactly, but it is a sort of encapsulated set of interwoven NPCs, locations, and so on, which lends itself to small, intimate, interpersonal sort of campaigns. Where there's a lot of role-playing going on, but plenty of action and so on, if you want it. So I consider him to be a master of that kind of adventure, and it's something relatively new, I think. It's not something I've particularly seen around. He's also a master of the homage, or the derivative work, if you prefer. He has as broad a knowledge of pop culture and subculture and literary science fiction, I guess, as I would say that I do, and that really comes through in his work with the references and the influences. It may be a little bit too obvious to some people, but it is a rich sort of arena from which to draw, and he does that very well, in my personal opinion. So there are lots of plots and intrigue and weirdness within this game. It is, genre-wise, a sort of Tech-Noir rather than Cyberpunk exactly, but there are biological modifications, cybernetic modifications, access to psionic abilities either through induced mutations or excessive drug use, as well as some somewhat more optional elements of the supernatural and surreal horror. The game, the setting, whatever you want to call it, it's the bastard offspring of William Burroughs and David Cronenberg, really, with many tips of the hat to both throughout the game. Because there's one time I choose to wear a hat you can't tip, as well as the other influences that Miguel has. Giallo, for example, Clive Barker, a lot of the kind of odder, weirder stuff that's either in the science fiction and fantasy and urban fantasy fandom, or at least adjacent to it. So the Avalidad of the title is the successor to the Interzone, which was a real thing, a real place where William Burroughs spent a lot of that time on drugs, and is the setting for Naked Lunch and several short stories by Burroughs. Only in this timeline for Postcards from Avalidad, it never reverted to Morocco. Instead, it became a sort of libertarian haven, a heaven or hell, depending on how much money you have, sat there as an independent city-state within the territory of Morocco, owned and operated primarily by criminal enterprises and by corporations. Operating in a place where there are far less rules to consider or deal with, a safe haven from which you can run an international criminal network, or wherein a corporation can engage in unethical experiments and activities, and in which it can hide money without really being susceptible to any investigation or punishment. So a game consists of experiencing this strange place, the wild differences between the rich and the poor, the corporate elite and the rent boys scrabbling for a pittance living off the street, between corporate high-tech royalty and low-tech squalor for African locals and cast-offs. It's flavoured by its Moroccan heritage, but also by sort of retro future concerns about unstoppable Japanese corporations, all of that sort of thing. So it draws on a lot of different influences. What you do in the game is that you will likely play either zone sec operatives, sort of local police force, or mercenaries and private contractors. Zone sec exists because even in Avalidad, not anything goes, and mercs and PIs and freelancers and so on exist because it almost does, but people have money and they have interests and they want to hire people to pursue them, to dismantle their enemies, to expose them, to do them damage, to grab their corporate secrets, because it's also an area in which that is completely permissible. So games are likely to be sort of interpersonal dramas pushed along by the plot, by the investigation, the conspiracies, and is likely to consist of a sort of slow reveal of secrets and investigation, revealing different layers of corruption and oddness and strangeness in a very morally grey setting. Avalidad is dual statted for both actual fucking monsters and splat punk. That's asterisk punk, not the word splat punk. The AFM system seems to have accidentally created a pretty accessible, easy, if deadly system for running quite sort of dramatic sorts of games. Miguel has used that in a lot of things that I never would necessarily have thought would have worked for AFM, and in settings where you're not playing monsters, though you might be playing people who are morally and ethically dubious. Splatpunk was designed as a retro clone of Interlock and Cyberpunk systems, because we went years without any releases, and behind the scenes, when I was still part of Chronicle City, we were looking to try and license the Cyberpunk 2020 system for a game that we wanted to put out, and there was just no answer, no reply, and this was going back long before Cyberpunk Red was even a glimmer in anyone's balls. So we had no support, no releases for that game for a very long time, and it's a shame to see good systems fade away. Fortunately, there was already an open access version of Interlock / Cyberpunk called Action, so I was able to completely legally and fairly take rules and ideas and so on from other systems, express them differently and put them into that. And so it's meant to be an open system so that you can create games around that kind of rule set. And Miguel had an inside track that I was working on that, and so Avalidad is the first release that incorporates that system, and probably the one I think it would be best to run it through, but AFM works just as well. Why should you buy it? Well, it's the first Punk release, and it's got kind of beta versions of rules for psionics within it. The layout just about killed me trying to create something that both showed the North African influence, the psychedelic influence, and the kind of cyberpunk influence. So similar to what I did with the Twin Peaks homage that Miguel made, I've tried to make the layout, the artwork, the material within the book stand out as being something different, a different experience, a different world to most conventional RPGs. It is something very different. I don't think this has particularly been tackled in a lot of games before, so you might find something interesting there that will hook you, or you might not, but take a risk. If you're into the influences, like Burroughs, like the cyberpunk oeuvre, all the kind of surreal horror of Clive Barker or David Cronenberg, then definitely this is a game for you to pick up. And as I opened this video really saying, Ribeiro is a master of creating these kind of adventure contexts. It's hard to explain or to convey, but it's much more useful than a normal adventure book. Having a context, having adventure ideas and seeds and ideas and interrelationships between the different NPCs and so on certainly creates a ripe environment for adventure and for ideas. If, on the basis of my somewhat self-deprecating advocacy for my own material, albeit written by Miguel, you can buy it at lulu.com or in ebook form at post-mort.com, and I hope you do. Sang.
Aren't you a little tired of so-called horror media about shiny, sparkly, angsty, whiny monsters? I know I am, and that's why I created Actual Fucking Monsters, where you will play an actual fucking monster doing horrible and monstrous things and being tracked down and killed for it. Buy now at DriveThruRPG, post-mort.com or lulu.com.